Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sylvia Liska, and on behalf of the Friends of the Secession, it is my pleasure to welcome you here for the artist talk between Manuela Ammer and Danh Vo. Danh Vo's exhibition here in the main space of the Secession was long in coming. It had initially been planned for last year and was very wisely postponed to this September. Time and temporality are of essence in Jan's work, and this show, with its long period of gestation, matured into a glorious artistic statement in the space. Sunday will be the last day of the exhibition, and I'm sad to see it go. Considering how busy you were in the last few weeks, Jan had 3 major gallery openings in Europe. We are so grateful that you didn't shun the effort to be here and talk to us again and to travel to Vienna again. I'm going to refrain from enumerating Jan's substantial list of exhibitions and publications. You can easily read up on them. I would just like to revisit some of those shows I have seen myself. I had the privilege to have followed Jan's work for a great part of his career. The first institutional show I saw was in 2009 at the Kunsthalle Basel. Adam Simcik was director then. They had brought 2 gigantic chandeliers from the Majestic Hotel in Paris and exhibited them together with a tombstone Jan had designed for his recently departed grandmother. Over the years, these pieces have become cornerstones in the literature of conceptual art. Another milestone was the big exhibition at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, where he recast and fragmented the Statue of Liberty for the first time. The ear of the Grand Lady, right over there, is part of the show, and it's titled We the People. As part of the Venice Biennale in 2015, Jan curated a big exhibition at the Punta dell'Organa titled Slip of the Tongue, while he also represented Denmark at the Giardini. His retrospective at the Guggenheim Museum in New York was titled Take My Breath Away. Well, Jan, it simply took my breath away, so I was happy to see it. Manuela Ammer and I both discovered that we met Jan together with his close artist friend and mentor, the wonderful Julie Ault. Together with Martin Beck, Julie has exhibited here at the Secession as well as at Mumok, so there's many circles closing here. It is thus with almost a feeling of familiarity that I'm welcoming our colleague from Mumok, the curator Manuela Ammer, here tonight. Many here are acquainted with Manuela's curatorial and literal powers, among other the exhibition Painting 2.0, Ulrike Müller, Bruno Gironcoli, and most recently Eva Hesse. Manuela and Jan have recently had the opportunity to explore this conversational format together at the Art Basel in 2018. It seems to have worked. You're here to do more of it. In Jan's work, the fundamental question of identity, origin, culture, gender, and value are intentionally left open to multiple interpretations. Yes, they may draw on Danh Vo's personal past, but equally do so in our collective history and our individual cultural memories. In this spirit, I thank you, Manuela and Jan, for letting us participate in your deliberations here tonight. Thank you.
I'd like to start with a thank you as well to the Friends of the Secession, and particularly Sylvia Liska for hosting this talk. I would also like to thank Jeanette Pacher, the curator of this exhibition, for showing me around in the show and for sharing her thoughts about it. And finally, of course, I'd like to thank Jan for this remarkable exhibition and for his willingness to talk about it with me. And I'd like to start by sharing my very first impressions of the show at the day of the opening. I hadn't talked to anyone, not to Jan, not to anyone else. I hadn't read anything. I walked into this space and my first thought was, wow, this is a grave site. And my second thought was, this feels like a new chapter in Jan's work. And the questions that I have prepared for this evening, and Jan might add some of his own, reflect this strange contradictory response. We will, I think, talk about death, mutilated bodies, violence, and the violence of history, but we will also talk about renewal and resurrection and maybe the afterlife of things as we know them. And I'd like to start with with something very simple, a sheet of paper, or rather 2 sheets of paper. 2 sheets of paper that share a common feature, that is the hand of Jan's father. The first sheet is really the artist's book. It's not in the show, but in the lobby of the Secession. And it consists just of 1 sheet of paper that is used on both sides. On one side, we have just 1 word, Neolithic. And on the other side, we have the basic information of the Secession and an ISBN number that identifies the book if you want to buy it or look for it. And I have a few ideas what this reference to Neolithic could involve, but it's still pretty obscure. It's the book accompanying the show, so I'm sure it has some relations to what is going on inside here. I did what anybody would do. I Googled Neolithic, and I found out that it's the time when humans first settled, built first places of worship, cultivated and domesticated animals and plants, and I think also the origins of writing date back to that period. And I wonder what Jan's associations are with that term that his father is, is putting in calligraphy onto these sheets of paper.
So, like I'm not like a, like, oh, so I have very difficulties to choose in life, and when I started, actually came the latest bodies of works that I actually have done is to make flowers, and my father would write the names of the flowers. I'm actually basically trying to learn the names of the flowers because I started to have a garden some years ago, and I discovered that I know a lot of names of museum directors, curators, artists, whatever. But the flowers that was growing outside in the garden, I had no clue of. And the birds that were singing. So I thought, that's a little bit weird. So I wanted to engage in this idea of learning. And I thought I should drag my father along. And when I started, this was actually the first work of these 2. But then I have this weird brain that always dictates me, that when you do one thing, you should also do the other thing. And I thought Neolithic was somehow the opposite of these flowers, and I got him engaged in doing both of them, And so I don't think so much when I start these projects. I just know that one have to embrace differences. And today I tell my galleries that we should register. I told them that they have to ask the collectors, especially the male collectors, are you a stone guy or are you a flower guy? And then we make notes, no, of how people chooses. And I think when I create these works, it's more examinations. And I'm joking a bit when I trying to register like who likes what, but it's a kind of work that propose differences. And then in the other hand, I think another exercise I'm trying to do is to think beyond human time. And I think that's one of the biggest traps we have, because we construct the world we live in thinking of human times. No, we don't have this idea of the Renaissance where you build a dome and then you actually don't know how to. You don't have the knowledge to end it, but that you think next generation takes care of that. No, or if you renovate murals, you think of you don't have money to renovate, next generation would do. I think we live in a time where everything is concentrated in our own time, human time, no, our life, and that death is the worst, no, and so a lot of works have dealt with how do we go beyond that, and so I think this is the beginning, no?
So there was no interest in the Neolithic as an epoch or as an era, like before history or before written history.
Neolithic is basically an abstraction, no? Because you get Neolithic stones from 50,000 years ago, and you get them from 4,000 years ago, and basically that's the only thing that was left behind, because the wood tools, the whatever that human beings were doing before disappeared, you know. So it's like this weird idea of trying to understand a time that's basically abstract, because we don't know much about it. And recently I was holding a stone in my hand, no, of Neolithic that was 50,000 years old. They said, but you know, who, you know, like that's also an abstraction in itself. But to hold that stone, you understood, you know, like to grab it, no, was so beautiful, because it's almost like a sculpture, but you're allowed to touch it, because you were beamed back to a function that was forgotten, no? And I think it's interesting, and that you know, everything is new for me about Neolithic, so I'm just looking into.
Same here. The second sheet of paper that is actually in the show is right over there, and it's a work that has accompanied exhibition of yours for a long time. It's a letter, actually, in style very different from the Neolithic piece. It's a letter by a French missionary who was based in Vietnam in the 1860s, and who wrote to his father a few days before his death. And it's a very, let's say, flowery language that he uses. He compares the prospect of being decapitated to picking flowers. And he sounds like he's at peace with the idea of passing away soon. And it's a piece that was written by a son to his father, but it's also a piece that is executed in your body of work by your father. It's written by your father, who doesn't speak French, but is copying this letter as an open edition onto pages. And this letter is interesting in many ways. I find it interesting because it mentions things or elements that are a part of your work and also a part of your show, like decapitation, the flowers. It's almost like an inventory or a partial inventory of the kinds of objects and entities you work with. But it's also interesting because it establishes a very particular relationship to language that I think is typical of your work, and that is interesting insofar as the person who produces the language, whether it's speech or writing, is not actually the owner of that language, if you will. There's a conflictual relationship between speech and or writing and the body that produces it. And I wonder whether you can talk about that a little bit and about the role of that letter that has, been with you for such a long time and will be with you for as long as your father lives.
So, what I always said was that if I contributed to anything within the arts, it was to produce this letter. Because it like everything that I'm against is in my body, and it's the categorization, the definitions of what things are in principle. And I think such a thing, as simple as it is, it just broke down. It couldn't be contained. It couldn't. I don't know if today my father have written over 2,000 letters. I don't know if it's an edition. I don't know if it's one body of work. I don't know if it's conceptual. I don't know if it's poetry. I don't know if it's my father and me. Like it just slippery and defies to be contained. And that makes it so important for me. And I never since could have made, or did make, a work that in nature just defies all these things. And that's why I said that was the work. I always said that, it should just, if I was more courageous, I should just have done that in my life, But I didn't. And what was important for me is that somehow, with my father's writing, because it, like at a certain time, we started in 2009, so it's over 10 years ago that we did it, that I also got him to do like big writings on the floors and walls,
yeah.
and he's not like a spring chicken anymore, So when I came up with this idea that he should just write flowers, names of flowers, it somehow clamped that body of work in a beautiful way that just liberated me to go back to look at my other works in a different way, I don't know really how to explain that, but it gave me a sense of second chance to look at anything I do in a much more humoristic way, like I don't know what word it would be, but innocent. Yeah, that's a good word for it. And but the letter was really, I think it's just because it doesn't allow itself to be contained.
You mean it escapes your control in a certain way because
like the first year that he was writing the letter, he didn't knew what he was writing. And then he have like this chat site where he talks with expat Vietnamese, And I think he found like a Vietnamese that lives in France or somewhere French speaking, and he got it translated. I never did it because it was pure economical transaction. That's why it at that time cost 300, and it still does today, that he would get 100 euros, and the gallery got 100, and I got 100, And that was why he did it. But then, as a very devout Catholic, he, when he discovered that he was writing this letter of a saint, he complained to me, and he was like he was angry that I didn't told him about this. But afterwards, he would then start to send letters to a letter to the Vatican and churches around in the world he likes. And for the birthday of I have a big army of nieces and nephews. He would, at their birthday, send them one too, you know. So he took, you know, so that's one part of it, because what really binds us is also like this idea that what my biggest concern is that whatever we do in life, whatever I do as an artist, is like to try to see the reality that we live in. And one of the things that I never understood was that he's not born to come in and see an exhibition like this. He's not, this is not, you know, like so many other people. It's like the homeless people sleeping in the back, no? There's a separation in the so-called society that we think is joined, but for me, is totally disconnected. And I think that was like my biggest conflict in working within the arts. And I think with this work, there was something interesting happening, because the producer of the work, I mean, I did the concept, of course, but the very producer of the work had a totally another reality to it, understanding of it. And I had no interest in trying to, you know, like when people still today ask if he understands it or not, it doesn't matter anymore. Because I think the connection became something beyond that, no? And the viewer, the person that reads French or whatever, have a total another reality to it, no? And what is this thing that connects it, no? And that poses only questions. And for me, that's the important part of making artwork, no?
What do you think his motivation was to participate?
I don't ask him. I send him this 100 euros. But I think that is reality, no? Because we try many times to rationalize things, no? But what happens when we let it grow? What is this thing, you know? And the mystery in it, the complications, the pain, all this is what interests me. I'm not interested. I was never interested, because I don't believe that me having the role as an artist to bridge, because I don't think that's reality. I think we have to look closer to this weird thing we're living in. You know?
It's more complicated than that, though, I think, because in relation to your father, you're not only an artist, obviously, but you're also a son. So we have almost a Freudian setup, and if I if I look at that division of tasks, the interesting thing is that it's, you know, a patriarchal situation that you reverse in some way, because you commission and pay your father to do something. And I would say in most ordinary father-child or father-son relationships, it would be the other way around. So I think it's a pretty interesting manipulation of it's an artistic liaison, of course, but it's not only that, it's also, you know, manipulating familial traditions and familial relations.
I think one have to try to keep multiple things exist at once, no? And it's true, I think I punished my father, but I also love him, no? You know, we got a better relationship at least. But I also said many times that we are the evil sisters of Cinderella, you know?
You
Cutting
and your
toes
father?
feet and yeah, to fit in. The evil sisters of Cinderella. You know, we cut toes and heels to fit in. We're also the same. And I think all these kind of things coexist beautifully together. And that's why I'm so against categorization and definitions, because then we kill possibilities, no? And like I said many times that we even wrote like Cinderella, but I only used like the one where we were cutting toes and heels.
The not Disney version.
The not Disney version.
Now that you've already mentioned the cutting of toes, maybe it's maybe it's a good moment to speak about tombstones. One way to look at that artist book is, of course, to describe it as something like a memorial plaque, celebrating the memory of this or that. And you've been interested in tombstones for a long time. They have figured in your work, I think, for almost 15 years. You designed, if that's the proper word, a tombstone for your grandmother when she passed, and also for your father, who obviously is still alive. It's a work that's in the possession of the Walker Art Center, and it will be your father's actual tombstone when he passes, is my understanding. There's a complicated contract, I think, figuring these details out. And I know of your fascination with the graves of Jean Genet, John Keats, Gertrude Stein, and so on and so forth. And I'm curious to find out what these tombstones represent for you. Just to add one thing, I'm particularly curious in the fact that there's a decaying body and that in a way is outlived by language. So another version of this complicated relationship of body and language that that was mentioned. So what's it with those tombstones?
Like it's like any body of works, they're all different because it's a research, it's a experimentation with a specific thematics, no? So all the tombstone, I think, was a kind of very different. But I always loved Jean Genet's tombstone because he said in life that the places he came, he never wanted to be buried in the places he came from. So he never wanted to be buried in either France or Morocco. And his boyfriend at the time, I can't remember if the lover or whatever, at the time I think was, maybe I don't remember the story right, but I think they were copying manuscripts of Genet in order to sell them as originals, no? So the son of the lover was trained in the handwriting of Genet. And what happened was when Genet died, the lover and somebody else was like, he's dead, who cares what he wanted? We want his body to be close to us. So they smuggled the body out to outside of Changshir somewhere, no? And they buried him there. And a pilgrimage happens, no? Like fans of Genet came, and at one point they stole like the writing message on his tombstone, and the son that thought that he didn't want to see people steal like the plaques anymore, he decided to carve Genet's name on the tombstone. But he was trained in the handwriting of Genet. So his handwriting is on his own grave. Mm-hmm. And these are the story that gives you a parameter of what art should be, I think.
Mm-hmm. Which is?
I know I was good at it.
I mean, what you describe is And I think that also relates to the way you thought about the artist's book, is like, what are the minimum requirements of a record of something? And in the case of the artist's book, is just this one word, this one obscure word. And obviously in the case of a tombstone, it's usually the name and the dates of life. And I think there's one way of looking at many of your works is this interest in how things, survive, or how history, how memory survives in a material fashion after the person or the people who were involved have passed away. And the tombstone would be probably the simplest version of that. And I find many elements of, sepulchral culture here in this exhibition. The marble, the flowers, religious sculptures, elements from grave sites. So if you allow me to run with this metaphor a little further, there's something like a coinciding of the institution of art and the institution of a cemetery here. And I just wonder what kind of art, or what about the art institution is carried to its grave in this exhibition, or what are we mourning or remembering? I wonder if that's an idea that you can relate to.
Like I have, like, by coincidence started like to work with gardens, and that gave me a little bit a sense of time beyond yourself, because you look at things differently. And if you met me, you did. But I was 5 years ago, I cut down gigantic trees, no? I mean, they were dangerous. And I asked like a gardener to plant me gigantic trees. And she refused. She was like, if you want to plant gigantic trees, then it's not going to be her. She wanted that things have to grow in. And maybe I'm not going to see it full blooming, whatever that means. It's also okay. I didn't understood that 5 years ago. But today, when I look at a small tree, or to plant a small tree, I have the perspective, imagination, to think, and that's enough, no? And I think that marks a difference in how you look at things. And I'm sure, as an artist, and also because I did too many exhibitions, I'm work damaged by the very fact of deadlines, of presentation, of exhibitions, in the sense that everything, when I finish, like, everything has to be ready, And I think that I don't want so much more of. But it's a new thing for me. I don't even know, because it's so new to how to describe it in reality. But just simple as, like, I can do all the failures in a garden because next year is going to be different, no? And then all the different what do you call it, like it's just a very different things, but it's very healthy, because it's really, in a way, the opposite of exhibition making. But does it need to be different? That's my question now, no? And I have to see.
So what you basically describe is a different sense of temporality. That's what I hear anyway. That you can't bend something to your rules or to your needs, but you have to go with the flow, or go along with something that follows its own time and logic and growth?
It's so simple that it even sounds stupid, no? But I think that how I've done exhibition or seen exhibition before, we had learned to present, no? And in many times it's presented as it's gonna stay forever. And I think it's so simple to, if you understand that, okay, there has to be snow because then it covers the ground and you get some plants next year. So you see things in perspective. So when you see a field of snow, what do you call the garden full of snow, it's good because you get a better garden next year. So you have like these steps of looking, no? And I think that has something I just never thought of in making an exhibition. So in this exhibition, I asked Hans, the technician that I work with, to think of, because this is also a thing that we don't think of, no? Who is our viewer? Is our viewer, there's one viewer. I'm aware of that. But why can we not make, I told Hans, can you make structure? So when we pack like the exhibition down, you just close it and that's it, no? And it makes life easier for you. And just do that construction a little bit nicer so it becomes something else, no? And I think a person that knows how to put like these wood beams together, they find a satisfaction in looking at what Hans did with these crates, because it's actually just crates, no? But related to that, I think it's also the steps that is more joined than what I did before. So it's like also a presentation that knows that this is just going to be transported somewhere else. And, trying to do these kind of steps a little bit more visible, I think, or honest. I don't know, I don't have the vocabulary for it yet.
So what you mean is basically that there's no display elements, things that are just here to, present the work. Everything that we see, or almost everything that we see, will be put to another use once the whole thing is packed up. And there's also, I noticed there's also nothing is fixed, nothing is screwed into each other. It looks to me, despite the fact that I think of a gravesite, it also looks to me like a board game. Like there's these fields, and then there's elements on the fields, and they are obviously positioned in a particular way. But my impression is that they could also be arranged in different ways, and probably will be arranged in different ways, or have been arranged in different ways. So there's a mobility to the whole setup that I think every viewer senses.
Yeah, it's Jeanette. I've been there when we install. No, I really have the philosophy, like I don't want an exhibition to look perfect. There's plenty of other artists that would do that much better than I do. What I like about things that's not perfect is that it opens up possibilities. When you look at a thing, when I think that this is perfect, then I change it. Because it encloses, it kills possibilities. And I'm just a person that are more for the idea that there's possibilities. So I always tell like the installation team that I work with that, just do anything. I don't care. Just don't do the wrong thing, no? Because there's possibilities of that. And that is the balance that one have like to negotiate. And, I still try,
But does the, if we stick to the idea of the mobility of this exhibition, or in the imagination anyways, it's also like you've had these big or almost retrospective exhibitions at the Guggenheim and in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And also here there are elements of almost all parts, or all important pieces or references to all the important pieces that you've made are in this show, but in a very different way than in, a retrospective that is very material intense and comes with, hundreds of loans and the complications of all that. It feels a little bit like a table of contents of your work, but not a table of contents, that belongs to a book that we haven't read yet. A table of contents that opens up towards something else. And I wonder if there's some truth to that. This idea of a retrospective or a retrospective format that doesn't point to the past but to the future.
It's really simple, but I think I'm gonna be too honest or whatever, but most of my practice deals with the fact that I'm a very practical person. I'm so logically and structured in reality. Some would not say that's true, but the very fact, which I think is actually interesting, and I would love to share this, is that I couldn't do it when I was younger because I didn't have money to storage my stuff, and I also thought, why should I keep things? So I did an exhibition. I was fortunate that it went some other places, but at a certain point, I learned that if you want to have control with your exhibitions in the future, you have to keep the works. Because an exhibition like Guggenheim cost 800,000 euros to ship around, That was painful. That was painful to think of a shitty exhibition for 800,000 euros, no? And I learned too late that if you have the works, then you control in the future what exhibition you want to do, and you can do it much cheaper, which is always a factor that has to do with it. So I started to keep works for myself. And that's what you see. I try to pick works that I think has something that means a lot to me. And that's what you actually see here. And then I also have like a big storage. So the idea of building beautiful crates, then I can just have a look at it at home sometimes, when needed. So it all boils down to practical decisions.
I believe that, and I don't. We've already talked about father figures a little bit, and in that first attempt, we stayed with your biological father, but I want to expand that idea somewhat, more in an art historical sense. Walking around the show, looking at things, I see, or I think I see the work of other artists that have, inspired you or interested you. I look at the relic of the feet in the refrigerator, and I think of Paul Teek, and I look at the flowers, and I think of Felix González Förster, and I also see someone like Tetsumi Kudo here, not aesthetically, but in spirit. And obviously, there are references to something like the horizontal field in minimal art or the box in minimal art. And it's twisted around and complicated in ways that, feels very alive and contemporary. But it's almost like, certain conceptual or minimalist ideas were filled with bodies again. The boxes are filled with bodies. There's bodies on the stone tiles, the marble tiles on the floor. I I wonder how, these art historical references, certainly you're aware of them and you're interested in them, how they come into play.
Yeah, like when I studied, and I think it's true. Tech is a very important person for me. Kudo and Felix Gonzalez Torres. My brain was just like totally. I was so into his work that I didn't work, because what do you do when you see an artist doing so brilliant works as he did, no? And how to escape that? Because the trap is that you copy other people's work. But you have to, I think what happened was that you make your brain thinking in a certain way, and then you make something physical, no? So maybe I stop with this beautiful example that, of course, these were very important artists for me. But Nancy Spiro, when she, at a certain point, no, I can't remember how it was, but somebody recommended her because she was taking the headlines of the newspaper, the pictures, the language of the war, no, which was totally pop. So somebody recommended her that she should go to Leo Castello, no, and see, because or maybe she thought it herself, but actually she was just using pop art strategies. So maybe she should go to Leo Castello and ask if he wants to show her work. And of course he didn't do, but I still today think that she was a totally pop artist. And I look at these kind of things, and this is how I learn art history, It was just a little bit fucked up or different, or whatever you call it. But these are the weird definitions that we all the time try to negotiate, no?
I mean, there's definitely a way to look at your work in terms of commodity culture. The boxes, that may be a minimalist reference, but fitting things into boxes in the most efficient way, or displaying things in a way that can easily be deconstructed and, made ready for shipping. Doing things the most efficient way is definitely...
You got it totally right, because one of my favorite designs were like the Billy shelves, no? That was what made IKEA, because anything designed for the Billy shelves are totally designed to not make use of 1 square millimeter of space in the containers, no? And that creates the form of such a thing. And then you go back in history, no? Then you go to Johnny Walker with their square cup bottles and stuff like this. This is design. This is design, I think, is super interesting. And it goes back to these kind of things.
I mean, in a way, and I think we are getting close to the end of this talk. In a way, all of the aspects that we've touched on, religion, for example, religion and commodity culture, they all have to do with different notions of the fetish or of fetishism. And I think the perspective of fetishism is one that is very productive with regard to your work, whether it's sexual, religious, or has to do with commodity culture. And I wonder if that's something that you can relate to, that, these different notions.
Totally. But I actually call it desires, no? And I formulate it in the way that my worst enemy is my own desires, because it's mostly constructed by something else, no? So that's what I'm trying to work with and find out, that's to be against it.
You mean desires that are sort of...
Why you think this is more beautiful than this, and why I choose this rather than something else, no? These are really my struggles. In a good way, to discover who was it that entered my body, and what makes it.
Like what institution, what rule,
what fashion. And that's it.
Well, the desires of Jan might be a good point to wrap it up. And thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody, for listening.